For 19 months of the continuous Israeli assault on the Gaza Strip, no international journalists have been permitted to enter the enclave, and humanitarian access is severely restricted. So there are few independent accounts of the situation in the territory. That's meant that increasingly the world is relying on the testimony of volunteer doctors at Gaza's hospitals to give an accurate account of the impact of Israel's genocide on the Palestinians in the Strip. One of those doctors is trauma surgeon Feroze Sidwha, who we interviewed on the show last November after he'd spent a period at the European hospital in Khan Yunis. Early today, Feroze joined me again, this time after having returned from a second period in Gaza at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. I began by asking him about the state of Gaza's remaining healthcare infrastructure the second time around.
It's a mixed bag, actually. The only thing that was better is that the hospitals were no longer displaced persons camps, because the hospital administrators and the Ministry of Health had decided that, after the Israelis rolled through each hospital and forcibly displaced everybody from them, they decided that they wouldn't allow Palestinians to come back and camp within the hospital itself. Because when we were at European Hospital, and the same thing happened at every hospital in Gaza, but when we were at European Hospital, the fact that it was a DP camp just made it impossible to do anything. You couldn't. A hospital can't function with 1,500 people living in its corridors, like not patients, just regular random people living in the corridors, because they figured it was safer and there was some electricity and things like that. But it made it impossible for the hospital to actually work properly. So Nasser didn't have that problem anymore, which was good. That made it actually easier for us to work. But other than that, everything else was worse. The Israelis reimposed a total blockade on Gaza on March 2nd. And I got there on March 6th. The state of the population, Gaza has been hungry since about 2014, you could say, but it's really been starving since October of 2023. And that's had a major effect. It's, you're talking about but when I was there, I guess 16, 17, 18 months of constant deprivation, not just of food, but of clean water, of shelter, of the things that are much more basic to human health than healthcare is. And so the patients that we treated were actually much worse off than when I was at European. When I was at European, the Rafah border was still open. The town of Rafah hadn't been destroyed, and so people were still relatively well nourished. Most of my patients they lived in Khan Yunis, and they still lived in a home. But now that's not the case anymore, and it's things are much worse. Things were much worse even when I was there in March and April. Now they're approaching catastrophe.
When it comes to the blockade, how has that specifically affected medical supplies, for example, that you've needed access to?
For me specifically, I'm a trauma surgeon, which it's a little bit different than in the UK. In the US, a trauma surgeon is a general surgeon whose job is to stop people from bleeding to death. Not an orthopedic surgeon like in the UK. But so for me, my job is surgically speaking, my job is very simple. I don't need fancy equipment because there's no time to use it. So with a scalpel and with basically any kind of suture, I can do almost everything I need to. So I was able to stop people from bleeding to death just fine. But basically everything else was impossible. Because that like not dying of blood loss is like the basics, right? Like that's not some sort of grand achievement in the scope of healthcare. You need to be able to put people back together. You need to be able to reconstruct them. Like we're not talking about people who got in a car accident and broke their arm. You know what I mean? Like we're talking about people who've been in explosions. They have traumatic brain injuries. They have cervical spine and other spine injuries. They have rib fractures. They have torn organs in their abdomen. Like all of these things need to be dealt with properly, reconstructed properly. That requires keeping the person alive through this event, which usually requires an ICU. And since the destruction of Shifa Hospital, there hasn't really been a functional ICU in the Gaza Strip. I mean, technically, like the building is there, but it's Shifa was the only place where critical care could really be done competently. And then there's just a million different things that are missing, making it impossible to do these things. And on top of that, we're not half of what we're dealing with is badly injured children, and they require more specialized equipment, more specialized care, different types of specialists. All of these things are available in the largest hospital in the third world, in any third world country, these things are available in the big flagship hospital, but but not in Gaza because of the blockade. So like Mark Perlmutter, for example, he's a hand surgeon that was there with me. He ran out of, orthopedic surgeons. Like if you're trying to reconstruct the bones and joints in somebody's hand or their elbow or whatever, you're going to use pins and screws and things like that. It's almost like woodworking. But he didn't actually have any of that stuff. So he was having to improvise. Like at one point, he actually used the drill bits themselves, not proper hardware, but he actually used the drill bits themselves to pin two parts of a kid's elbow together so that it might heal. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. You'd lose your license for doing something like that in the United States, but there it was the only option. So these are that's the situation now. So when I was there from March 6th to March 18th, it was the blockade was on, but the ceasefire was still in effect, if you can call it that. Obviously the Israelis never really stopped firing, but at least the widespread massive bombardment wasn't happening. And so my work as a trauma surgeon there, for the most part, it was just like every day was a busy day in California where I normally work. But on March 18th, when the bombing resumed, that was the biggest mass casualty event I've ever seen. Nasser Medical Complex, really it has 250 beds, but there's a 200-bed tent extension. It's just literally a tent with a cot in it. There's no electricity, there's no oxygen. It's pretty useless, but nevertheless, it is a place for someone to stay. So let's just say it's a 450-bed hospital. Just Nasser Medical Complex alone, at just the morning of March 18th, saw 221 trauma patients, half of whom were badly injured children. That's completely ridiculous. There's never. I actually think I'm actually looking into this right now. I think it might have been the most extreme mass casualty event that's ever happened, like on the planet. It was completely insane, and the mismatch of need to resources available, not just in terms of material like suture and anesthetics and stuff like that, but like trained people who actually know what to do. Let me give you maybe like a comparative example. So I was a resident during the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013. I was still training at that time, and I was training at Boston Medical Center. And if you look at all of Boston's level 1 trauma centers, these are like the big flagship hospitals. There's 6 of them. And if you were to combine them, they have about 4,000 beds. On that, and they also, I think they have about 400 operating rooms. I think they have about 400 surgeons on staff who are capable of performing trauma care, things like that, right? Massive resources. That whole system together saw 129 patients on marathon bombing day. And we all thought it was like the massive event, the life-changing, world-altering event. Nasser alone saw 221 patients. You know what I mean? Like it's just completely. I don't know of a time that any one hospital has ever seen its entire bed volume of trauma patients in one morning, and then gone on to basically keep doing that every day forever. Like they're still doing it now. In fact, Nasser is where most of the patients that were just shot in the Witkoff massacre went, and so it's just completely the system. No health system could possibly deal with this type of influx of patients, but certainly not one that is besieged and starved of supplies, of personnel, of electricity, everything.
I'd like to ask you about how Gaza's Palestinian medical workers are coping. We've recently covered the horrific story of Dr. Ala al-Najjar. 9 of her 10 children were killed in an Israeli airstrike in Khan Yunis, and her husband, also a doctor, has since died of the injuries he sustained in those strikes. How do Gaza's doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers keep going when the risk to their lives and their families' lives are so high and ever present?
People who have followed the war, maybe war is not the right term, but people who have followed whatever happens in Gaza in the last 19 months closely will remember that there's plenty of stories like this. Actually, there's a lot of stories of physicians in working in an emergency room or in the operating room, wherever it might be, receiving their own family members as casualties and dead. And no, I mean, I'll tell you, I don't speak Arabic, so the only people I can really talk to speak English, and that, I'm a doctor. I was working in the hospital, so mostly I spent time with healthcare workers, talking to them, getting to know them, and I can tell you that with literally 100% of them expect to die, and they expect their children to die, they expect their families to die. in this slaughter. And it has an effect. And I mean, like, I gave a briefing at the UN Security Council the other day, and I said, some people have said I was exaggerating, but I wasn't exaggerating for effect at all. I was just describing something that I've seen frequently in Gaza. I said that actually the way I put it originally, but they asked me to change it. They said it was too harsh. The way I put it originally was Gaza's parents memorize their children's clothing and tell their friends about it as well, in case their children are decapitated and need to be identified later in the morgue. But that's literally true. It's not an exaggeration at all. That's one of the first things the doctors tell each other. And I know lay people do as well. It's not just the physicians, but when they come in, they literally say, Salam alaikum, kifek, shu akbar. What is your kid wearing today? Like literally, I'm not exaggerating about this at all. It's just shocking. I mean, what do I don't know what that exactly does to someone's mental health, but it's certainly not a positive impact on it. I'll tell you another story. Actually, there was it's not about the doctors specifically, but it hits doctors and kids. During ceasefire time. I probably met this guy on like March 15th, something like that. I met a cardiologist at European, at Nasser Hospital, and he lived in Rafah, so he lived near the Philadelphia corridor, which is there are a lot of Israeli gun towers there, and they fire into the city. So at one point, and this is during the ceasefire time, at one point, he has four small kids, but the youngest is like a 4.5 year old girl. So if you think about it, her only memories are from this insanity that's been going on. And one of the gun towers started firing into their home, so the whole family dropped to the floor. But the little girl, the 4.5 year old girl, just kept dancing in a circle, playing, just entertaining herself like she had been before. She's completely ignored it. And her mom and dad said, what are you doing? Come here, sweetheart. And she said, no, don't worry, mommy. The bullets are all the way up there. It's like that's how a kid thinks about traffic. They don't think about its impact on them. But like most children are afraid of gunfire. This kid isn't. I mean, it's just that's there's the impact that this is going to have on the mental health of the people of Gaza is totally unpredictable. But if you wanted to turn a bunch of people into angry, sullen, hostile people who are nurturing a desire for revenge. I'm quoting Miran Benveniste, the former deputy mayor of Jerusalem. But if you want to do that, this is probably the best way to do it.
Gaza has been under complete siege since early March, so whilst you were there, the head of the International Red Cross has described Gaza as hell on earth after Israel closed the small number of aid centers that exist today. Does that description match your experience?
Yeah, I've worked in plenty of other places. I've worked in Ukraine, I've worked in Haiti, I've worked in Zimbabwe. These places are all very difficult. Like the war in Ukraine is no joke, but these places are all very different from what's going on in Gaza. Gaza is a charnel house of death. It's there's nothing else going on other than people dying. It's kind of a shocking thing, this. And it's not just the death and the destruction, but the depravity of it. I mean, this whole Gaza Humanitarian Foundation thing that you were just mentioning. Yeah, they closed these what are called aid distribution sites. I don't know. I'm sure you saw the videos of one of them was shot by one of the American contractors who was at one of these distribution sites. They just laid out some boxes of dried food on a table, and then people just swarmed this area. Like no attempt at any organization, like nothing. This is something that a humanitarian organization would never do because they would know exactly what's going to happen. Well, a massive crowd formed of people who are trying to get anything they can because their families are desperately hungry. And then the Israelis just start shooting at them. And then they have the temerity to deny that they shot them. Like, I was, I don't know why I was subjecting myself to this, but I was watching Piers Morgan talk to somebody the other day. I can't remember. And they continued to deny They were denying that this even happened. They said, "Oh, there are disputed accounts." Well, okay, I mean, the Israeli military denying its crimes doesn't make it a disputed account. Like nobody says that about any other crime. Well, the perpetrator says he didn't do it, so it's a disputed account, and we can't talk about it seriously. That level of. I actually even saw somebody. I think it was on his show again as well. Maybe like UK Lawyers for Israel or some crazy thing. But the deny that that Dr. Al Najjar's children were killed. That's just shocking. I mean, what and I know Gaza. It's there aren't as many phones in Gaza as it seems because everything we see in Gaza comes from someone's cell phone. They're actually quite they're quite hard to come by. Everybody that when we go there as medical teams, every physician asks us, please bring me a phone. My wife doesn't have one, my mom doesn't have one, because the Israelis just destroy phones all the time. And furthermore, if you have to run out of your phone out of your house, and your two kids are here and your phone is over there, you're probably going to grab your two kids first, because your house is about to be bombed. But despite the lack of access to the internet and things like that, and electricity and cell service and everything else, these stories do get back to the people of Gaza, and it's hard to tell you how abandoned they feel, and that's one of the other reasons they feel resigned to death. There was a study from the War Child Alliance showing that, I think, if I'm remembering the numbers right, 96% of Gaza's children say that they expect to die in this. That's wild. When does that happen? That doesn't happen in Ukraine. Again, the war in Ukraine is not a joke. I've seen it. It's not. It's extremely brutal. The war in the conflict in Haiti. The none of these things are just like, oh, they're nothing burgers. No, they're very serious. But they're not what's being done in Gaza right now. 49% of Gaza's children are actually suicidal, according to this same study, the War Child Alliance. That's just complete insanity. That never happens. But children, it's very uncommon that large numbers of children have their entire families killed in front of them. And that's what's going on in Gaza. It's very uncommon that large numbers of children are starved repeatedly in this repeated cycle that just keeps happening. Starvation, a little bit of aid gets in. Starvation, a little bit of aid gets in. It's just incredible. But anyway, sorry, you were asking specifically about the closing of aid depots, and no, I mean, there's these aid. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has not brought in any significant amount of aid to Gaza, nor will it, because that's its exact purpose is to not do that. That the Israelis are saying perfectly clearly that the whole purpose of the GHF is to get the world to shut up and stop complaining about starvation, not to act, but without actually stopping people from starving. And it's quite a cynical thing. The whole explanation for this, it's kind of shocking that it wasn't until maybe last week or the week before that Europeans finally started speaking out about this. I don't mean you, but I mean European governments. And but as if any rational human being, like the Israelis claim for why they had to stop aid from going into Gaza is that Hamas is stealing it and they're selling it to fund their war machine. That these are all, it's so bonkers that one can't even get their head around it. But nevertheless, just suppose it's true. Okay, what is the best way to make the price of a commodity go down? Provide more of it. If you really wanted to stop Hamas from selling all the aid, just flood Gaza with aid. And how are they going to sell any of it? Why would you pay Hamas for flour if you have a ton of it easily available? It's completely absurd. And furthermore, they're like, we want to put pressure on Hamas, who also, by the way, uses everyone in Gaza as a human shield. So obviously they don't care about them dying. That's, again, the Israeli claim. It doesn't happen to be true, but that's the Israeli claim. Okay, so you're telling me Hamas stole all the aid, doesn't care if Palestinians die of starvation or gunfire or anything else, and you're going to stop aid from going in on the presumption that it puts pressure on Hamas? This isn't even coherent, But so it's just been obvious that this was just a ploy to starve people. There was nothing more complicated to it than that. Any normally developed 12-year-old kid could see through these lies. They're just transparent. And the fact that my government and your government both supported it until, your government until last week, at least rhetorically, they've made a little bit of a break. Mine still adamantly and strongly It's a shocking indictment of our own culture, of our own understanding of the world. It really is.
Last week, as you mentioned before, you gave evidence at the UN Security Council. What was that experience like?
It was interesting. I the session had been planned for a month, but they asked me like I don't know, 60 hours before. And I live in California, so to fly to New York was a pain. But my partners at my work are phenomenal people, and they support what I'm trying to do in this regard. So they covered my shift that was supposed to have on Wednesday. But it was interesting. You know, I didn't. The reason I agreed to do it was not because I thought it would make any difference at the Security Council. I just know that the United States doesn't report these things. Like the New York Times didn't report anything that I said, even though they're down the street. But but I know the rest of the world does listen to what happens in the Security Council. So I thought it was just an opportunity again to tell people what I've seen. I think I told the other fellow that I spoke to last time I was here this story, but I had a meeting with a high level State Department person when this is under the Biden administration, probably like October or November of last year. I can't remember when exactly now, but during that meeting, I asked her, she wasn't cabinet level, but just below that, if I understand the organization of the U.S. government properly. And during that meeting, I asked, is the problem that the Biden folks don't know what is being done with our weapons, or that they have just decided that? And she said, no, they absolutely know. She said, every time we're in a meeting, I bring up the New York Times article that you wrote about what American physicians and nurses saw in Gaza. I bring up the Politico article that you wrote. I bring up all sorts of other things that other people have wrote. I'm hardly the only one. And people like Brett McGurk and Anthony Blinken and Lloyd Austin, none of them say, oh, no, that guy's a Hamas sympathizing liar. They just say, OK. So it's a political decision to keep doing these things. It has nothing to do with being convinced that they're wrong. They all know they're wrong. They know burning children alive is wrong. That's pretty straightforward. And furthermore, these people can read English. Like they're literate. Most of them are intelligent people. They're well aware of what the Israelis say out loud. They don't. The Israelis make no attempt to hide what they're doing. At this point, just literally none. They just couldn't care less at this point. And so, being at the Security Council, I knew it was, again, a platform for people to hear something that they may not have heard before, but it wasn't. I knew me talking there wasn't going to change the U.S. vote, and the U.S. vote is the only one that matters. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're supposed to vote on a resolution. I don't know if it's today or this week, but I've seen the draft of the resolution. It's guaranteed that the U.S. is going to veto it, just because it calls for a ceasefire. There's no way they won't veto it, and that's just unbelievable. Unbelievable.